was about to present you. Amanda Palmer is a singer-songwriter from the USA. She became known with the duo Dresden Dolls, Dresden Puppen. Maybe you can say how you came to Dresden afterwards, but today she performs solo and in other bands like Amanda Palmer and the Grand Tex Orchestra. But she's now today here, or she's in London via Skype, because she is a crowdfunding pioneer. She raised more than $1 million for a tour and an album production, one single tour and album production, more than $1 million. And she's one of the most successful crowdfunders in the USA. And she wrote the book, The Art of Asking, about her experiences. And maybe an essence of her advices we can hear today. Welcome Amanda.
Hi.
You are sitting in a flat in London, in a private flat in London, right?
I am. I'm sharing it right now with a writer I know, Neil, my husband.
We hope the connection is stable the next half an hour. So maybe the first question, I said more than $1 million by 25,000 people who funded your album and your tour. How the hell did you manage to raise that much money in one single crowdfunding campaign?
Well, I wrote a lot about it in my book, first of all. It was pretty, in one sense it's very simple, and in another sense it's very complicated because you can't understand why the Kickstarter was successful unless you understood the relationship that I had with my fans from the time I started my band in 2001 to the time that I did the Kickstarter in 2012. And basically I spent 10 solid years building a trusting relationship with my fans, and this is the part that it seemed so simple to me, but it was very hard to explain to, especially finance magazines, or these people who would come to me and say, so what's your secret? And I'm like, my secret was I had a relationship with all these people and they trusted me and I trusted them, and when it finally came to ask them for something big, it wasn't that strange because I had been building up to it year after year. And I blog a lot, I communicate constantly with my audience, so they really knew me. It wasn't just that I was a famous musician, more than, I was their artist. They'd been trying to help me for years, especially since I left my major label. And what happened when I left my label is, and why I felt safe leaving my label, is I looked around at my fans and I said, you guys are gonna help me, right? And they said, yes. We will help you. If you don't want to sign to another label, we'll just order your music from you. And this was a literal conversation I was having on my blog. Not, it didn't come from out of nowhere. So, I think the most important thing is that I've seen artists much bigger than me try to use Kickstarter and fail because they don't have a constant, heavy-duty relationship with their listeners. It only really works if you have that relationship.
It also means that you use crowdfunding not only to fund, but for other scopes too, as Andreas Dietrich said this morning. You're using crowdfunding not only to raise money for a tour, but you sell your CDs. It's also a pre-sales channel. And it's replacing the label you worked with before. So you're a whole small company of your own, you can say. It means that you have a special personality. I mean, are you the personality made for crowdfunding?
I think so. I think we were talking about this earlier when we did our setup call. There's something really painful nowadays about the fact that artists have had to really sell themselves. And a lot of artists just really don't want to take on that job. And the fact that it's not even so much that I don't mind it, I like it. I really like talking with people, doing business with people, being very honest with my fans and my audience about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, what I don't want to do. And I kind of, I like being naked, like in both senses of the word. I really like sharing myself, but that's because I'm that kind of artist. There are a lot of artists that just aren't like that, and it's so painful to them and embarrassing, the idea of going straight to their audience and asking for anything. I'm making a record right now with one of my heroes. His name is Edward Caspell. He's the singer of a small culty band called the legendary Pink Dots. And he was just talking to me about the fact that he's been touring for 30 years, like since the early 80s, and he has never once on stage mentioned that they have CDs for sale or t-shirts, even though that's where all their money comes from, and they're a teeny band, and they rely on the sales of their CDs after the show, the t-shirts, for everything. And he told me it's not that he doesn't want to do it, it's that he can't. It just feels so wrong. And meanwhile, I'm the kind of person who on stage is like, okay, everybody, we're going to take a break from the show. Everybody get out your phones. I want you to join my mailing list. And everyone's like, okay.
I'm like, can you understand other artists? I mean, I think totally. especially for Swiss artists, I think Swiss is quite more like, no, I don't sell myself. I'm modest. I don't have to excel from others. So can you understand this type of personality also? Not just
totally. It's totally peinlich. No, I get that. But here's the thing. I believe there's a kind of a myth that we've bought into as artists and as musicians especially. And in the era that we grew up in, whatever, the 70s, 80s, 90s, I mean, there really was this system that we were shown of artists being completely separated from their livelihoods and businesses. I mean, you see, there's this story, this narrative about rock stars and musicians not being workers, but being these like fucked up romantic people who were just like off making music and doing drugs, and like you would never. It sort of goes against the narrative of the romantic musician to imagine them like just sitting there on their laptop doing their emailing. But the truth is, if you go further back in time, being an artist, being an artisan, having a job like the other person who has a job, who makes shoes or makes bridges or does taxes or whatever, there was a lot less romance around it. And I think that romance kind of killed us in a way, because it makes these artists and musicians feel like you must be inherently unsuccessful and a bad artist if you have to sit here and do the wheeling and dealing and ask for the money for the CD. But it's just not true. We've just really been formatted to believe that. And it's one of the things that I really like about this new era, is it's not even just about crowdfunding. It's about reminding the world that art isn't as special and artists aren't as different. And there's something, that artists kind of love about that. I mean, we also love it about ourselves. It's like, I'm an artist. I don't do email. I don't touch money. I'm too busy thinking about it. It's just bullshit, right? And so I think that's like everything else, there's pros and cons, and the world is changing. I mean, money for the arts in America especially is just disappearing. So there's going to have to be another solution. And if it means that the artists are going to have to take a little bit more responsibility for finding funding for their stuff, so be it. That may just have to happen.
And what advice do you give to artists that are not that outgoing as you are? Shy artists. There are shy artists out there.
Oh, I know a lot of shy artists. Well, it may help to remember that there have always been shy artists. I mean, since long before the printing press and record labels. And usually the shy artist has an advocate, you know, a friend who helps negotiate the real world of distribution and business and publicizing and whatever it is that takes the thing that you've made and puts it, broadcasts it out into the world in whatever way that needs to be. And that system hasn't changed, I think, in like hundreds and hundreds of years. If you were a shy poet and you just happened to be really good, or a shy musician and you happened to be really good 500 years ago, and you didn't want to tell anybody, chances are we only know about you now because somebody else was like, fuck, your stuff is so good, why don't you share it? And that advocate, you know, it doesn't have to be a manager or an agent. For a lot of my indie rock friends, it's the girlfriend or the best friend or the drummer in the band who doesn't mind being the front-facing, public-facing entity. So yeah, I mean, my advice to shy musicians is find a loud friend. many times.
And what about musicians or artists in general at the beginning of their career? I mean, you said you built your friends, the contact with your friends during years and years. Do you think crowdfunding is something also for artists that are not so known, that don't have a name yet?
Yes, so here's an interesting thing about crowdfunding that I think people don't think about very deeply, which is all crowdfunding can be successful. It's like asking someone, so are you a successful musician? It's like, well, like, what the fuck does that mean? You know, does it mean I'm a successful musician because, you know, I played at a bar for 20 people and they stopped and paid attention? Or does it mean that I'm finally as famous as Madonna and everything in between? And it's the same with crowdfunding. You know, if all you need to consider your crowdfunding enterprise successful is $500 to buy a new sound system for your band, and you manage to get 50 people to give you $10, then that was a really successful crowdfunding campaign. If you're trying to crowdfund an entire, you know, van and a tour and all your 4 band members to take off work for the year and you need $500,000 so that you can all live for a year, you're just going to need more help. And so there is this weird thing of people saying like, okay, well, how famous do you need to be, or how successful do you need to be? How big of a tribe do you need to have found in order to have a successful crowdfund? And it's like, well, that's the wrong question. The question to ask first is, what do you need? And how much, you know, how much support do you need? And if you only need the support of 10 people, you've answered your own question. You need to be 10 people successful. And if you need the support of 5,000 people, you need to be successful to the point where 5,000 people are going to help you. So it's those questions always strike me as so strange, because I think people sort of already know the answer. You know, to ask something as vague as, you know, can you crowdfund if you're small? Of course you can. That's like asking someone, can you play music if you're small? It's like, yes, you play music right over there in the corner bar to the people who are going to listen. And anybody can do it as long as you have a realistic understanding of what's going to come back. So if you don't really have many fans and you're pretty much doing a crowdfunding, you're hoping that your boyfriend and her sister and your parents and your aunt and uncle and the 6 people who you think are going to support your crowdfund. If that's your expectations won't be broken, and you'll get $50.
Yeah, so it means it always depends on the expectations, or you also have to adapt the expectations to your name you have so far. So, but the project I mentioned in the beginning, the campaign you raised $1 million was via Kickstarter, and you sold CDs, you organized your tour with that money. But now you changed the platform, you went to Patreon, which is a different system, which funds not single projects, but funds artists. Could you explain the difference?
So, Patreon, the thing that I think is fantastic about Patreon is I don't think it could have existed in a pre-Kickstarter world. It was almost like Kickstarter got everybody used to this idea of directly supporting an artist, a filmmaker, a product, whatever. And Patreon, I've used the metaphor, Kickstarter is like a really serious date, and Patreon is like getting married. Because it's a constant subscription. And to put it sort of crassly, I have 8,000 patrons, about, give or take, as it changes. And I have all of their credit card information, or Patreon does. And I have total control over when I charge them for art, which is an immense amount of trust to put into an artist's hands. I mean,
they agree to give you every month, like between 1 and 5.
Right. So it's not. So Patreon works in one of 2 ways. You can either support a creator by the month, and give them, $1 a month or $5 a month, or you can use it the way I'm using it, which is per event, what I'm saying is I'm making things. So sometimes that thing is a webcast, sometimes it's a song, sometimes it's an entire little mini album. Sometimes it's a crazy performance art piece that I then make a video of and put online. It's really anything my imagination can come up with. And sometimes I put out 1 thing in a month, sometimes I put out 2, I've never put out 3. And a fantastic thing about this system is that the patrons can cap the amount that they will give me per month. So they can budget. And if they've agreed to give me $10 a month and no more, and I put out 3 things, if they've capped it, instead of being charged $30 at the end of that monthly cycle, because they're charged once a month, they'll only be charged $10. And a lot of the patrons do make use of this, especially if they're giving me $5 or $10 instead of $1. And that way, they also have the peace of mind knowing that I'm not going to sit there 1 month and go like, ha 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 ha, I charged you 50 times. And while you weren't noticing, I robbed you blind in your sleep. But they also, the important thing is they know I would never do that. We have a really trusting relationship, and I constantly communicate my ideas and my plans, but I also love surprising them. 2 days ago, I released a 10-minute string quartet version of Purple Rain by Prince. And I charged them for it, and when I charged them and hit that button, it's something in the realm of, 20,000 some odd dollars that I'm gonna get. But I take that 20,000 some odd dollars and I pay half of it to Jarek Bischoff, who was the composer and the arranger. And we also pay the violist and the cellist and the violinist and the 3 sound engineers who worked on it, and the studio in New York that we recorded the vocal, and the studio in LA that we recorded the strings, and the painter who made the artwork, and I pay my staff, and the money comes in, but the money goes back out. In a sense, I'm kind of a curator right now, helping redistribute money to other artists who I'm working with, and it's really quite beautiful.
Your music?
I think it's safe to say that the internet has changed my music. Maybe not crowdfunding per se, but the intimacy that I'm able to have with the world I think, has changed my music. And some people might think it's changed my music for the better and some for the worse. I remember the first time I got a stupid idea for a stupid song, just like a dumb 3-chord ukulele song about postmodernism and Madonna and Lady Gaga and the nature of fame. And I was writing a blog and I thought, oh, it would be really funny if instead of writing a blog, I just wrote this dumb song. And I was just like, you know, I could just do that. I could just write that and put it up on YouTube right now. Why don't I just do that? It would be fun. And it was the sort of thing where I never would have done it sitting there like in my underwear in the kitchen if I hadn't been able to just put it out into the world. It's not like I would have written that song and then waited for 3 months for when I was back on tour to play it in front of an audience. And the fact that I had this captive audience, you know, in the computer, and I could speak directly to the world using the medium of music did change my music, has changed my music. Not all of it. You know, I still like to write songs where I don't put them out immediately and I go off in a room and I really work and I think and I cultivate something non-immediate. But the internet is a great immediate platform, and for someone who has and gets lots of spontaneous ideas, it's a godsend.
You come from the US, from a culturally speaking, completely different background than me in Switzerland or also in Great Britain, but you also know the European context, you know a little bit of Germany and Great Britain, so you know that cultural funding works quite differently here. Public funding is important. So here there are different kind of fears. There is public funders who see crowdfunding as a rival. There are artists who fear cutbacks of public funding. What is your perspective on this? Do you think crowdfunding could work here the same way as it does in the US?
I think crowdfunding can work anywhere, and I think crowdfunding can work beautifully in harmony with other systems. I mean, one of the things that you've seen with crowdfunding and film, for instance, is, you know, a lot of filmmakers will use crowdfunding to get themselves into a larger system, because no one wants to just stay in the system of crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is its own kind of problematic beast for a lot of artists because you have to spend a lot of energy on the crowdfund itself. And crowdfunding isn't distribution. Crowdfunding doesn't put your movie on a screen in front of people all over the world. There's a different system for that. And, you know, the same way there is in most places already a system for public art. You know, there's a great Kickstarter story. I don't know if you guys know. So this was like maybe 5 years ago. There was a really successful Kickstarter for a guy in Detroit, America, who wanted to build a giant public statue of RoboCop. and he was like, this is Detroit. We don't have a statue of RoboCop. Why don't we have a statue of RoboCop? And all these people in Detroit were like, yeah, why don't we have a statue of RoboCop? And so he raised like tens of thousands of dollars. I think he raised like $100,000. And this guy was nobody. He just had this idea. And all of a sudden, all these people in Detroit got really excited for this piece of public art. So they hired a designer and they had the money, but the city of Detroit was like, what are you talking about? And you know, you're not the government, and you can't put this 100-foot statue of RoboCop in our city in public. And I mean, what an interesting dilemma, right? Like, there's a bunch of people who really want this thing, the actual people, the crowd, and then you've got the government and the city council, going like, this is not the usual way things get done around here. What, these people are crazy, and they want to erect a statue that we haven't approved. It's a piece of pop culture. And, you know, how that story ends isn't as important as the idea that, in an ideal world, these two factions can work together. And if the city is wise enough, they'll go, oh my God, you know, the people have spoken. They want this thing. How can we help? Where should we put it? so it actually, you know, is somewhere perfectly tasteful what all these people want. And I think there's going to be a conversation between the powers that be, you know, the old school government officials, the thing that the public sculpture that takes 15 years for like a bunch of people to shuffle around tons of paperwork. And the fact that people, you know, when people are empowered to understand that things don't have to be so complicated, it can be very dangerous on the one hand, but it can be really inspiring. On the other hand, when people realize that, you know, the world is real, things can tangibly happen. You can get a bunch of people together and say, we want to change that, and people can change it. I feel like the same thing is happening politically with the internet, where people are really realizing that they can have a voice together and decide what they want on the radio, decide what sculptures they want in the public parks, decide, you know, what they want journalism to be. And Patreon, you know, interestingly, Patreon is attracting journalists who just don't want to answer to the mainstream media, and they want to research and write their stuff, and they're really well known and respected, and they're getting paid $5,000 an article to just go out and research real stuff without New York Times or The Guardian saying like, well, that's a little dicey, you can't write about that. So there's a real liberation happening, which is fantastic.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It was very interesting and entertaining to have your ideas here.
Thank you, guys.
We're a little late, yeah. I hope I won't take off some of this. I still suggest that we have 2 or 3 questions.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
I have a question. Using this new Patreon model, do you feel an amount of stress because people want stuff from you all the time, so you have to produce a lot more than you would have normally?
That's a good question. I mean, very honestly, the answer is no. For instance, when I went off to have a child, which I just did, you know, one of the reasons that I set my Patreon up to be per piece of content, per thing, instead of per month, was for exactly that reason. Because if I were getting paid $30,000 a month, as opposed to $30,000 a song, I would feel an immense amount of pressure to always be making content. And I didn't want that pressure. I wanted to be able to, you know, when I got pregnant, I wanted to be able to just go off and do nothing for 4 months and just have a baby and not feel guilty and not feel accountable. And you know, I'm the kind of artist who, it's the other way around. I have so much I want to do, and I have so many ideas and so many ways that I think the Patreon could be really creative, and I can do, you know, collaborative videos with people and animations and performance art projects and write spontaneous songs with my friends. And if anything, I have the opposite problem, which is like I'm worried I'm going to make too much stuff and piss people off. Which is also why the cap is really useful, because this cap exists, I never have the feeling that I'm going to be taking advantage of my fans if I put out 4 songs in a month because it just happens to be a really productive month. And I'm still kind of figuring it out. I mean, the other thing that's important to point out is that I'm engaged in this constant conversation with my patrons. I blog on my Patreon. I basically moved my blog over to Patreon. And I blog every other day practically. And I read all the comments. So I would know if my fans were upset or, you know, leaving or whatever. But I mean, sometimes they do leave. It gets, since it's so personal and it's so direct, you know, it happens. A few months ago, I had like a few dozen people, and a few dozen out of, you know, thousands and thousands isn't a lot, but a few dozen, you know, I felt it. Because people were too upset that I was vocally, outwardly, on my blog, on Patreon, supporting Bernie Sanders as a presidential candidate. And people were saying like, well, you know, I don't feel comfortable giving my money to you if you're gonna give it to Bernie Sanders. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But it brings up a really interesting question about transparency. One of the questions that I did throw back at the crowd and the people who were saying, we're leaving, we can't stand seeing you supporting Bernie Sanders and using your platform politically was, you know, if you go out and buy a Taylor Swift record, you know, all that money that is going to her is going to go to her eventually. And then she's going to do with it what she wants to do with it. Don't be poisoned by the illusion that that still isn't true if you're working in a less direct system. You're just not thinking about it. If you buy a Ted Nugent record, your money is going to go to a right-wing political party at the end of the day. So just know that. It's not like it magically, you know, it's not like this money magically goes into some, you know, untouchable, pure system if you use a record label in order to pay an artist. So, I mean, that went a little off topic, but yeah, to answer your question, no, I'm not really worried about it, but, you know, it's a constant conversation with my fans, and I'm always having it. And I'm always afraid I'm going to screw up, and sometimes I do, and then I take a step back, and I start over, and it's fine.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I think we could continue to listen to you for hours, but we have a program in the afternoon and we have lunch waiting for us. Thank you so much for answering us, and as you are in constant contact with your fans, I guess you can be in contact with this audience too if they email you and have further questions. Thank you so much and good luck with your work.
Thank you, guys.